Gather round to hear the tale that chilled the air in the tent of a group of Boy Scouts one night on the side of Bald Mountain. Not you, KB. It's a tale as unbelievable as it is rhetorically instructive. In the introduction to his book, The Motives of Eloquence, Richard Lanham draws a distinction between the philosophical, serious way of using language and the playful, rhetorical way. Speaking of the goals of ancient rhetorical training, he wrote, "Hold always before the student rhetoric's practical purpose, to win, to persuade. But train for this purpose with continual verbal play, rehearsal for the sake of rehearsal." A lot of people say that the kind of writing you do in the classroom should be authentic, which is to say it should be very serious, but I'm not so convinced. Of course, when it comes to real-world writing, you'll want to take serious topics seriously, but that doesn't mean that practice has to be serious too. That's because when you're learning rhetoric, the process is much more important than the product. You're not just finishing a task, you're developing specific skills. And these are skills that you can develop no matter what you're doing with them. In other words, you can improve your carpentry skills, whether you're building a very serious shelf for some very serious books, or if you're building an upside-down birdhouse for turkeys. As long as you're practicing, why not have some fun with it? So with that in mind, today we're going to talk about how you can practice your rhetorical skills by making some absurd arguments, because honestly, you don't have to be doing schoolwork to be getting better at rhetorical writing. So if that's the kind of thing you're interested in, hit that subscribe button. It'll help out the show and it will keep you in the loop. And of course, if you've already subscribed, you have our gratitude. Now, on with the show. Many years ago at a Boy Scout camp, my friend and I had to host a younger boy in our tent one night, and now it wouldn't have been a huge problem, except he spent the whole night yammering on about one thing or another. He was too cold, he couldn't sleep. What did we like to watch on TV? He was hungry. What time was it? It went on all night until, in the early hours of the morning, we heard something in the trees. "What was that?" he asked. Loopy from sleep deprivation, we said, "Goats." "Goats?" "Yeah," we said, "carnivorous goats." And then we lowered our voices and said they live in the trees and they pounce on unsuspecting prey. They have very good hearing, so we have to be very, very quiet. He shrunk into his sleeping bag and asked, "What are we going to do?" Well, we explained that the only thing we could do was stay very quiet and hope. They only hunted at night, so if we could make it to morning, we would be okay. We told him that carnivorous goats had long horns and razor-sharp hooves. They moved so fast that people thought they were invisible. He kept asking questions, so we kept responding in graver and graver tones. By the time we finally got him to clam up, we had developed a deadly serious mythology. These goats were empowered by the moon. They had psychic powers, and they used those powers to hunt. The only way to be safe was to be quiet and to sleep. Eventually, we did get a couple of hours of sleep, and now that I think about it, he didn't come back to our tent that next night, so I guess you could say mission accomplished. Of course, in the end, we weren't really doing anything different from what you would do if you were writing a paper on tax policy or renewable energy. We had a problem, we needed to get somebody on the same page to solve that problem, and we had to use language in a particular way to get that person on the same page. More specifically, we wanted to sleep, and the extra kid in our tent wouldn't let us, so we had to convince him that there were psychic carnivorous goats in the trees, just waiting to attack us if he didn't shut his mouth and go to sleep. Now, you might be saying that we could have just asked him to be quiet and go to sleep. And we tried that around 11:30. By 3 o'clock in the morning, though, we had to adopt a different rhetorical strategy. Rhetoric happens at the opportune moment, and it only works when conditions are right. You wouldn't, for example, write a paper about why we should join World War II in 2020 because the war's already over. Similarly, we couldn't have made our case about the dangerous goats in the woods if that kid hadn't already been spooked by some noises coming out of the trees. And of course, it wouldn't have worked as well the next afternoon. It had to be at night, and it had to be after he was already scared by those noises. And if you remember some of the things that we've said about ethos, pathos, and logos in the past, you'll probably recognize some of the things that we had to do in order to make our story convincing. We had to sound trustworthy. That meant no chuckling or smiling. Our story had to make sense and be reasonable, so the facts built on each other, and my friend and I had to be careful not to contradict each other as we added new things to the story. We also had to get our audience to care, to be emotionally invested, so we leveraged his initial fear, added a performance of our own worries, and made it look like this was no game at all. And for our trouble, we finally did get some sleep. If we had mismanaged that rhetorical situation, we might still be staring up at the roof of our tent, wondering if that kid would ever zip it. I've never seen my students more fired up in class than on the day that we had a debate about whether cake or pie was a better dessert. In fact, it's something they asked if they could do, and I had no reason to stop them. It was a way for them to practice rhetorical skills, and they could have some fun. And far be it from me to shut down fun with a load of academic self-seriousness. You see, you learn by doing, and like we've been saying this whole time, play is just another form of doing. You can practice your rhetorical skills just as well by scaring a kid into sleepy silence as you can by writing a letter to your senator. Because it's all the same skill set, if you're getting better at one, you're also getting better at the other. Really, what we're talking about is something along the lines of Kenneth Burke's idea of pure persuasion, which he says involves the saying of something, not for an extra verbal advantage to be got by the saying, but because of a satisfaction intrinsic to the saying. It summons because it likes the feel of a summons. It would be nonplussed if the summons were answered. It attacks because it revels in the sheer syllables of vituperation. In other words, this kind of rhetorical practice through play is about the sheer pleasure of making outlandish arguments. It's not actually about convincing someone, it's about reveling in the process. It's like the ancient Greek sophist Gorgias, who wrote a speech praising the woman who was often blamed for causing the Trojan War. So before we talk about other ways of playing, I suppose I should say that this is just about having fun. In no way is this an endorsement of deceiving people with malicious intent, and then after the fact saying you were just playing around. Now that we're clear that these suggestions are for play and not for evil, here are some things you can try if you're looking for fun ways to train your rhetorical muscles. Argue for the inane and innocuous. You can have a lot of fun explaining everything you know about carnivorous goats in a persuasive way, or maybe you could engage a friend in a debate over the true color of the sky, providing sound reasons why it is in fact an unseeable shade of yellow that only tricks our brains into seeing blue. Or perhaps you could talk about who would win in a fight between Robert Frost and Socrates. The fact that the absurd is so far removed from practical reality means that you'll really have to stretch your rhetorical skills to make your point. Or take a more subtle approach. Whenever I'm at a potluck or a group dinner, it is my solemn responsibility to persuade people to go back for a second helping of dessert. They always say that they want to, and then they talk themselves out of it, and so it's my job to remind them of all the reasons they have to go get more. It's all in a spirit of good fun, but it still requires some on-the-spot rhetorical thinking. You could also practice some stylistic grandstanding. Instead of saying, "Hey, what's going on?" you could say, "Dearest associate, I approach you in humble amity at this time with but a simple query, what's up?" Or maybe you could try sneaking a particular word into your next paper. In either case, you want to avoid patronizing whoever you are addressing or making your writing sound unnatural or contrived, things that will require keen rhetorical senses and sharp writing skills. But on the whole, words don't cost very much, so don't be shy about waxing prodigiously grandiloquent every once in a while. And you will, as always, need to pay attention to your mode of delivery, one of those ancient canons of rhetoric. When people tell me that they don't want to study hard for a test, I just tell them matter-of-factly to drop out. Obviously bad advice, delivered with an air of sincerity, is an exercise in pleasing rhetorical incongruities. So go out there and have some fun. Yes, rhetoric is a useful thing to think about in the context of school, but it's not just a school thing, and if we think of it as one, we're really limiting what we can do with it. And as always, if you have questions or comments or things you'd like us to talk about in the future, let us know down below. Or just write us a silly haiku. Those are good too. And with that, I should go. I think I hear something in the trees. And you will, as always, need to pee. Oh my goodness.